Hey, hi. Full Crazy Town number 9. Barely made it on time. Crazy days these days. Everybody knows it. Nobody's doing anything about it except me. Solutions to the craziness. Just have to get through the next 6 chapters and get to the big finish. Chapter 14. What's fair is fair. Censorship and war. In 1949, the Fairness Doctrine was introduced by the FCC and stated that holders of broadcast licenses had to present controversial issues of public importance and to do so in a manner that reflected differing viewpoints. 1949. It was abolished in 1987. Why? To get, maintain, and increase power and control. How? By any means necessary, be it cajoling, reasoning with, paying off, scolding, threatening, deplatforming, censoring, content moderation, shadow banning on Twitter, also known as visibility filtering. That sounds so much nicer than shadow banning. Compromising and or pressuring to conform to the dominant narrative. You might also mention like blackmail and death because that figures in everything. The Restrict Act and its UK cousin, the Digital Services Act, would finalize the disinformation industrialization complex. England's PM at the time, Rishi Sunak's dad, owns Infosys, the database company picked to pave the way to a worldwide digital currency. Macron is cracking heads and gassing people protesting harsh austerity measures. In 1997, Clinton signed the bill that reduced the number of media companies from 50 to 6. The authoritarians and their Silicon Valley friends have used algorithms and overt deplatforming to censor critics from the left and right, foolishly turning figures like Alex Jones, Trump, and Marjorie T. Green into martyrs. The ruling class in both parties told lies about trade deals, reforming welfare, abolishing financial regulations, austerity, the wars, and military operations. Trump's not a member of the Washington insiders family, so how did he win? Twice, how did he win? This question bedeviled the DNC, causing them to lash out the only way they could, immediately and with mega lies. Trump was somewhat less militaristic. He didn't start any new wars, but he still channeled megabucks to the Pentagon, defense industry, and unelected government advisors and propagandists. He tightened down the totalitarian screws, constantly threatening China. Still, because he's a Washington outsider, he's not in the cool kids club. Elite bunch, those cool kids. Warbucks flow to the defense industries, and then they enrich their shareholders, that is, mostly themselves, through stock buybacks rather than dividends. Capitalists say that ever expanding profits are necessary to stay ahead of inflation, which they control. When the $95 billion for Ukraine and Israel was approved, the justification switched from to keep Putin from conquering Europe to it's more like a jobs program to keep Americans working and to improve our GNP. War is especially is the raison d'etre of all systems totalitarianism. War justifies a constant search for internal enemies. It's used to revoke basic liberties and impose censorship. War demonizes those in the Middle East, Russia, and China who are blamed for the economic and social debacles that inevitably get worse. War diverts the rage engendered by a dysfunctional state towards immigrants, poor people, the unhoused, people of color, feminists, liberals, artists, the press, Muslims, Russians, everybody, Asians and terrorists, domestic and international. Political stagnation and economic misery breed rage, despair, and cynicism. It gives rise to demagogues, charlatans, and con artists. Hatred drives political discourse. Violence becomes the primary form of communication. Vengeance is the highest good. War is the chief occupation of the state, but it's the vulnerable and weak who pay. The authoritarian measures taken during the pandemic further depressed all commerce except for super large corporations. There were many furloughs and firings, layoffs and closings, bankruptcies and evictions, and kids fell behind in school. Loss of income was catastrophic for millions, and the overall cost was in the trillions. They were not able to consume as much, so large retailers took a big hit too. However, the business owners had a remedy for their woes, and that was to raise prices and then rake in their share of the $5 trillion CARES Act. The freighter that got stuck sideways in the Suez Canal disrupted the supply chain that depended on just-in-time arrivals. The disruption was minimal compared to the lockdowns, but they provided a good excuse for higher prices. As the economic, socio-political, cultural, and traumatizing effects of the pandemic wore on, former Democratic lefty liberals began to turn their backs on those less fortunate, like the thousands of small businesses that closed and the old untold millions who tried to cope by abusing drugs and alcohol and suffered from depression and suicidal ideations. Chapter 15, journalists identify the problems. Somehow half the country was turned into deplorables, anti-vaxxers, insurrectionists, racists, misogynists, sexists, and fascists. 175 million people. Next came censorship and free speech restrictions, while the government said they were protecting minorities by censoring all critics and labeling them domestic terrorists or unregistered foreign agents, like the Uhuru movement in Florida that criticized U.S. militarism. Our government and the press corps have circled the wagons around the nation's most powerful and rich rulers. Billionaire executives from powerful companies and wealthy left-leaning media personalities suddenly need to be protected from hate speech and criticism. Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi go on and on about modern-day journalism. Glenn says that for hundreds of years, journalism was all about transparency and shining light into dark spaces. But today's media personalities cozy up to government and big business sources. They call for more censorship, not less, especially when it comes to those who disagree with, like a cardiologist calling for more smoking or a human rights group calling for more torture. They cheer on Assange's imprisonment and they scream when Musk censors them or one of their own. Elon said that they just had to delete the offensive tweets, such as about his jet's location, but they dug in their heels and waged trench warfare. They said the deletions were the whim of Musk, forgetting that other censoring was at the whim of someone else on their side. They consider his censorship a new kind of tyranny, something never seen before, not something that they've cheered on against the others. Matt Taibbi laments the loss of the meaning of facts because no one can agree on what a fact is. Political parties can't agree on who won the elections of 2016, 2020. Matt describes the executives of Twitter, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft as Quislingian, referring to the WW2 Scandinavian leader who collaborated with Nazis occupying Norway. Media figures today seem to be thrilled to be absorbed. Indeed, most of them see access to government and business officials as a directly upward career path. They're too young to know that past journalists would ask probing questions once they got inside because they were acting in the best interests of their subscribers. But with the fragmentation of news channels into left and right zones, the media becomes an echo chamber for their own viewers who expect to be told what they want to hear. Matt says events since Trump's election and the authoritarian lockdowns and mandates have robbed astute media consumers of their sense of normalcy. We feel the news has been distorted. The public's reaction to various news events seems off kilter, either being too intense, not intense enough, or simply unbelievable. You'd read that seemingly everyone in the world agreed that a certain thing was true, except that it seemed ridiculous to you, which put you in an awkward place with family, friends, and others. Matt asks, should you say something? Am I the crazy one? I can't have been the only person to have struggled psychologically during this time. This is why these Twitter files have been such a balm, close quotes. He says the establishment has stolen reality from us by propagandizing the media left and right. As he digs through the mountains of tweets, he sees a repulsive, horrifying, and dystopian history of a world run by anti-people. What do you mean by anti-people? He's dead dog serious about this. He says that he prefers reading about the real world compared with the vile, insulting facsimile of truth that the media peddles. Here's another quote from Matt. Personally, once I saw that these lurid files could be used as a way to get us back to something like reality, I relaxed for the first time in years. Walter Kern and Matt reflect on last year. Journalism's great nevermind. Nothing to see here. Huge stories like the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline and the damage to the bridge to Crimea are explained away with a shit happens attitude and here's the next big thing, spy balloon. Many people flock to puff pieces because reality is just too distressing. Shortages of Adderall are reported. News flashes are huge until they're not. The Pelosi home invasion and attempted murder fades into an ongoing investigation and a 30-year prison sentence for the attacker. Russiagate, a 3-year investigation, and then no collusion and no official retractions about the false statements. COVID lab leak? Maybe, maybe not. What about the spike in unexplained deaths worldwide? What about all those who claim they were vaccine injured? Was it an insurrection or was it FBI infiltrated and instigated riot on January 6th? Is Putin as evil as Hitler? When lies are exposed, like the Twitter files detailing lies about COVID and Hunter Biden's laptop, there are no admittances of wrongdoing, no ownership of deceit. Politicians and the media double and triple down on their fabrications, even after their lies have been debunked. The big lie, the big lies. When delving through the Twitter files, Matt found evidence of weird sexual habits among many politicians. He admits to not knowing what's average when it comes to weird sexual habits. The Twitter files just seem to reveal a lot of kinky behaviors. Even weirder, politicians can be blackmailed and or otherwise controlled when their secrets are known. Weirder still, They get invited into groups like the Illuminati and the Bohemian Society, these secret societies. Remember, I keep saying it. The brainiacs, the Freemasons, we're the builders, we're the creators, we have the answers to building the secrets of the pyramids, and through our superior intelligence, we will save the world with our benevolent attitude. Yeah, bullshit. Was like the Illuminati and Bohemian Society, replete with hazing rituals, weird sexual acts, secret names and handshakes, and bonding ceremonies. Rituals associated with homosexual relations and or odd sexual practices are common, from Yale's Skull and Bones down through college fraternities. As a member of the Phi Kappa Tau fraternity, the University of Kentucky, I can attest to strange hazing that requires pledges to be stripped and blindfolded, and then made to pretend to hump a sheep, which was just a frat bro with a sheepskin on his back. It's a rich, weirdo caste system, pure and simple, with a clear cut pecking order. There's nonstop propaganda to accompany this system. It's the system of the mob, the security state, and Epstein, that the mob, security state, and Epstein used and almost perfected. You get rich, then use your money to get your way via bribes, blackmail, and threats of violence against family, friends, and pets. Ugh. Chapter 16, Fascism 101, Neo-Feudalism. The merger of governments with industry to crack down on workers' rights and oppress civilians in general is the textbook definition of fascism. When someone like Matt Taibbi exposes collusion between big tech, the FBI, and the Democrats, he's labeled a conservative or a far right fascist. Most liberals deny there's any censorship going on besides that which keeps creeps like Alex Jones and Trump off social media. The proposed sale of TikTok may change that. The 170 million users are reportedly outraged that the government is taking away their favorite news source. They will undoubtedly switch to Rumble or a newer free speech outlet. When it comes to censoring government critics, lefties usually call for more clampdowns on free speech, proving that they're for their own free speech, but not for those on the other side of the culture wars. However, I don't want anyone to protect me from hate speech. If someone breaks the law regarding slur or arrest them, and the attorneys epic then fend for themselves, compete for scarce resources, reducing the effectiveness of labor unions. Resentment is spread by granting some immigrants privileges like rental assistance and free health care in California and $1,000 a month debit cards in many cities. The blacks say, we've been asking for these things for decades, and now you're giving them to undocumented workers? Our ruling class responds with, that's right. What are you going to do about it, sucker? Families are displaced by conflicts and inequality all over the world. 84 million people have been displaced by U.S. military aggression since 9/11, and 4.5 million civilians killed. The prison industrial complex locks up more blacks than were enslaved. That was 2 million people. The ones who are locked up is 2 million. That's more than the number of enslaved people during pre-Civil War. The Pentagon, CIA, and the FBI interfere with sovereign nations worldwide. The security state is more concerned with protecting wealthy individuals and their properties than protecting or serving the populace at large. Virtue signaling is a hallmark of those who want to be associated with the perceived winners. The feelings of superiority carry across every social engagement. The anonymity of social media emboldens users to attack opinions or people they don't like. The Democrats have divided mostly urban voters against mostly rural people. Voters have also been herded into believing that some deserve special rights instead of everyone deserving equal rights. England's ban on gender affirming care for minors might change that. Popular sentiment is turning against men declaring that they are women so they can compete against them in sports contests and change clothes and shower with them in women's locker rooms. While we're being diverted from the real issues, the money power machine rolls on and over anything and anyone who gets in their way, including Seth Rich, who leaked the DNC emails to Julian Assange. A note about authoritarianism: Russia, China, and Iran face criticisms for their harsh treatments of ordinary citizens. China is singled out for their lockdowns, and their brave protesters are praised. However, where was this praise when the Canadian truckers protested the same harsh measures? Back then, Trudeau declared a state of emergency. It allowed him to freeze the bank accounts of some of the protesters and anyone who donated to their cause. Since then, Iran has abolished their morality police, China has eased pandemic restrictions, and Russia released Brittany Griner. The BRICS countries have been joined by Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, the UAE, and Ethiopia. OPEC plus countries are no longer using the US dollar as their main currency. The star of The Big Short, Michael Burry, has shorted the New York Stock Exchange. And this is like a year ago. This comes after the US credit rating was downgraded as our $30+ trillion debt becomes nearly unserviceable. Chapter 17, a remedy for trauma. Now, most of this is pretty thick, but trauma is really at the base of the solution to the problem. The fact that people got traumatized means we have to reconnect with those from whom we've become estranged. Gabor Mate is Aaron Mate's dad, and he's a physician and author. He speaks and writes about trauma and its effects. He says that the pandemic, lockdowns, and mandates have been especially traumatizing to most Americans. Trauma can lead to people acting out against their own best interests, like continually voting for politicians who say they'll deliver more benefits to voters, but then somehow fail again and again. Why? How does this happen? Mass hysteria? Groupthink? Wanting to be part of the winning team? The inability to admit they made mistakes and or wrong thinking? The government instills fear and anger in people against the others and or against threats, both perceived and real. A lack of compassion can cause people to concentrate on their own problems only. And also, economic stress makes people look out for number one and not number 2, 3, or 4. People develop a blind allegiance to party doctrines, ideology, and the like-minded interest groups. The psychiatrist Gabor Mate says trauma is the result of some sort of violence. He says the remedy is to talk to someone about the cause, be it abandonment, death of a loved one, or violence to the body, mind, and or soul. He goes on, bottling it up and not talking about it is dangerous to your health. Every affliction known to humankind can be directly linked to trauma. Quite the statement. Every affliction known to humankind can be direct trauma. So that's abandonment, death of a loved one, or violence to the body, mind, and or soul. He says the trauma isn't the act, It's the effect of abandonment, death, or violence. Trauma can be cured by talking to someone about what might have caused the trauma. So this is where you get into the we got to talk about it, stop name calling and getting all emotional. Wait a minute. He, Gabor Mate, mentions ancient societies that celebrated the onset of disease in their midst. Huh? They saw maladies as opportunities to help cure the tribal member and thus make the group stronger as a result, sort of like communal natural immunity. Gabor also talks about capitalism and how its basic assumptions go against basic human needs. We need contact and commonality. We humans evolved and survived living in small groups, collaborating, cooperating, and using others to make the community better. Capitalism is selfish, greedy, aggressive, and competitive, exactly the opposite of what we need. Schools encourage individual achievement and use organized sports to indoctrinate students. They evaluate kids by seeing if the children meet the standards they set up. As part of the COVID CARES Act, $5 trillion, schools implemented a program called Character Strong. Teachers who want to teach this curriculum are paid 3 times their normal salary. Remember, I mentioned this. And the teachers become counselors in this program. Character Strong. They judge students to see if they fit into the societal norms as defined by WEF sounding goals like to improve the lives of children. Who could be against that? These goals are just forms of indoctrination to make people believe in feelings more than facts. Remember Kamala's vibes? Vibes, Kamala, most important. This is the stated goal of the new head of NPR, who comes directly from the WEF and the Council on Foreign Relations. People need meaning and purpose in their lives. They should not be forced to conform with a toxic culture. Instead, we're more lonely, anxious, depressed, and medicated. It's capitalist trauma that's vexing us, and not many talking heads or texting hands are noticing. Everyone rants and raves, bitches and moans at what or who they think are causing their problems, but the debates are mostly circular arguments that go on and on and on, usually focusing on emotional issues, not the root causes of psychological distress. Most pundits just yell at the camera about how stupid everyone is. Really galls me when I hear an otherwise astute commentator describe our leaders as stupid. A better descriptor would be childish, even infantile. They're not stupid. They just think the rules don't apply to them. They throw hissy fits and then seek revenge if they don't get their way. They're creating a dystopian society of permanent over and underclass of a permanent over and underclass, one vastly larger than the other. It's a man made world, artificial, matrix like in its attention to detail. It's a world doomed to fail. The elites have their underground bunkers ready, and they're working on space stations and looking into inhabiting the moon or Mars. However, like the Roman Empire and most failed schemes, our fearful leaders must depend on their security details to make their plans work. And history shows us that when push comes to hunker in the bunker, the workers look out for no one and forget about their betters. That's like the Praetorian Guard in Rome hiring out their services to the highest bidder, which eventually brought down the whole shittery. Chapter 18, The Horrible Truth. Here we go with 18, 19, 20. we really get down to the nitty gritty. It's kind of hard to read. It's hard to think about, talk about, but we have to because it's faux real. Starts about London, 1776. The British East India Company, having merged with the Dutch East India Company, was the first multinational corporation with its own mercenary force, integrated deeply in British Parliament, coordinated by British intelligence and the British Foreign Office. The East India Company was strongly influencing the foreign policy decisions, and the country found itself in debt due to the wars in India. They needed money to pay the import duties on tea, so opium was settled on as a cash crop. Opium, and later heroin, would play key roles in British and US domestic and foreign policies. The Green Gang originated as a secret society with roots stretching back to Luoism, a folk religion that followed the teachings of the Buddhist mystic Luo Mengong. In the late 1700s, the Green Gang became a powerful force among boatmen whose trade was the transportation of goods. Fearful of their growing power, authorities stepped in to suppress them, driving them underground, which only consolidated their power as they formed alliances with criminal groups. Under the leadership of Du Yangsheng, the Green Gang helped bring to power the Kuomintang, later known as the Nationalistic Chinese, under the direction of Chiang Kai shek. Between 1930s and 1940s, the Green Gang was fully integrated with the government of Shanghai and became the main source of power of the KMT. The Green Gang conducted counter-espionage activities and gathered political intelligence that were called upon to suppress trade unions and communists. The British influence over the US solidified in 1901 when President McKinley was murdered and an Anglophile named Teddy Roosevelt took over. His attorney general was Charles Bonaparte, a distant cousin of Napoleon, and he created the FBI modeled on what were then two newly formed agencies in Britain, MI5, MI6. In 1946, Churchill called for the Iron Curtain to drop, uniting the Anglo-Saxon races called the Five Eyes, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK, USA, into a common front against communist countries, starting the Cold War. 1971, the WEF's Klaus Schwab introduced the stakeholder theory, where morals and values are part of managing an organization, and business ethics are considered in the socio-political scheme of businesses. Prince Bernhard founded the Bilderberg Group, dedicated to bolstering a consensus around free market Western capitalism and its interests around the globe, which some see as an attempt to unite public-private partnerships, PPP, fascism for you and me. In 2020, Prince Charles announced the Great Reset mentioned earlier as a central doctrine of the WEF. Today, King Charles III walks in his father's footsteps as the president of the British World Wildlife Fund for Nature. Oh, doesn't that sound like a cause that you'd want to contribute to? Everybody, well, who's against nature? Yeah. It expresses the Malthusian idea that the human population isn't different from the animal population as far as population limits are concerned. Prince Philip was trained in a Nazi-managed program in high school. His four sisters went on to marry Nazi SS officers. Together with Julian Huxley, remember Brave New World writer Aldous Huxley's brother, and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, Prince Philip founded the WWF. The idea of this organization was to shift the moral values of society away from intrinsic human values, which had caused previous attempts at a New World Order to fail, and change society's values to save nature from humans. Oh, what a great idea. This was the basis of the Club of Rome, which states that economic growth can't be sustained indefinitely because of resource depletion. The United Kingdom and the US have a long history involving opium, going back to the Opium Wars and continuing to this day. Traditionally, opium was available in cough syrups. Then, after Prohibition cut off the legal option, the trade went to organized crime families. The Bayer Corporation created morphine and heroin around the 1900s, and it was used in a variety of cures and painkillers. The OSS officials, including Wild Bill Donovan and Alan Dulles, worked with various crime families, politicians, and agencies around the world to consolidate and control opium trafficking. Drug lords. The objective was to facilitate traffic, not to directly profit from it. Aha, see, that's what gets them get out of jail free card. Facilitate, not direct. Just help them transport like Iran Contra. Just put it in the duffel bags, and we'll take it wherever, and then it's yours to distribute. OSS agent Paul Helliwell, famous name from the OSS and from Chiang Kai-shek's opium operations. OSS agent Paul Helliwell was the director of Sea Supply, SEA, Sea Supply Inc., which provided Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang army the arms it needed to fight Mao Zedong's troops in Burma. Opium was sent to Taiwan, where it was processed for sale to support the KMT. Prior to his rise to power, Chiang Kai-shek and the Green Gang consolidated control over the production and distribution of opium with help from, ding, 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 the Rockefeller Corporate Foundation, which had set up shop in the 1910s with the creation of the Medical Board, an agency that linked opium to many medical applications. During World War II, the U.S. had established contracts with organized crime to help secure shipping lanes to Europe. Remember, that was Operation Underground. Joseph Lanza was tasked with countering Axis spies and saboteurs, preventing labor strikes, and limiting theft by black marketers of vital war supplies and equipment. To cover Lanza's activities, Meyer Lansky was asked to contact Charles Lucky Luciano, who was the boss of the 5 New York mafia crime families. Lansky's parents had escaped from Tsarist Russia and settled in New York City's Lower East Side, where he fell in with Bugsy Siegel's Sicilian gang and Lucky Luciano. Luciano agreed to cooperate with authorities in hope of consideration for early release from prison. In 1936, he had been tried and convicted for compulsory prostitution and trafficking after years of investigation by Thomas Dewey, and sentenced to 30 to 50 years behind bars. But during World War II, an agreement was struck with the Navy intelligence team. In 1946, Lucky's sentence was commuted on condition that he be deported to Italy. His contacts assisted in the 1943 amphibious invasion of Sicily by providing maps, photos, and names of contacts inside the Italian mafia. After the war, the cooperation between the Office of Strategic Services and the mob continued as Paul Helliwell saw a market for heroin in New York City's jazz clubs. What does that mean? Could it be Harlem? The OSS CIA helped warlords, organized crime families, and narco states smuggle drugs. Frank Wisner, head of the CIA's covert operations, along with James Jesus Angleton, chief of counterintelligence for the CIA. That might be James Jesus Angleton. I don't know. Anyway, two big names, Frank Wisner and James Angleton, chief of counterintelligence for the CIA, developed a working relationship with Meyer Lansky in New York City. Another big name, don't forget Sam Bronfman, who had links to Lansky, developed close ties to the FBI. Organized crime and the FBI. What could they do? Bronfman made a fortune distilling alcohol in Canada and smuggling it into large cities in the Northeast U.S. during Prohibition, aided by the National Crime Syndicate, headed by Luciano Lansky and others. He reportedly used sexual blackmail for decades to stay out of trouble with authorities. Later, he became a covert part of the anti-communist crusade of the 50s. His family became associated with businessmen like, remember this name, Leslie Wexner, allegedly the source of Jeffrey Epstein's wealth, which was considerable, and other blackmailers like sex cult leader Keith Raniere. There are more details about these cults in Whitney's book. She writes about Epstein's use of the phrase Pop-Tarts to describe underage girls obtained from Victoria's Secret auditions. Jerry Seinfeld's widely panned movie Unfrosted is about the snack food Pop-Tarts. Why would Jerry Seinfeld make a movie that flopped, widely panned, a movie about Pop-Tarts? That's because Epstein used the phrase Pop-Tarts to describe underage girls obtained from Victoria's Secret auditions. Bronfman was an associate of Lou Rosenstiel, also mob-related, who met Winston Churchill on the French Riviera in 1922, where Churchill advised him to prepare for the end of Prohibition. Lou got the backing of Lehman Brothers Bank to buy shuttered distilleries and developed close ties with J. Edgar Hoover by making his assistant Louis Nichols vice president of his Shenley distillery in 1957. This is around the time when the FBI's blackmail parties were in full swing. These associates avoided prosecution. Roy Cohn, the mob's lawyer, was a key figure in the trial of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, and later was Joseph McCarthy's right-hand man, sat next to Tail Gunner Joe as he waved his list of known communists. All of them participated in the sex blackmail parties at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, the infamous Suite 233, which included J. Edgar Hoover, later known as Mary, when he began appearing in drag with the renowned Pink Feather Boa. Amongst the notables who partied there, Cardinal Spellman, Dirty Trickster Roger Stone, Trump, who purchased the hotel in 1988, Epstein, Bill Clinton, Barbara Walters, Ron and Nancy Reagan, Rupert Murdoch, Mort Zuckerman, Alan Dershowitz, and George Stephanopoulos. A bit more about Bronfman. Via philanthropy, Sam Bronfman tried to buy some respectability. His kids married into aristocratic families like the Rothschilds in Europe and Wall Street royalty like the Lehmans and Loebs. Max Fisher, Wexner's mentor, worked with Detroit's infamous Purple Mafia gang during Prohibition and beyond. The Purple Gang smuggled Bronfman liquor, and one of the Purple Gang's founders, Abe Bernstein, was a close associate of both Lansky and Moe Dalitz, an American gangster, businessman, casino owner who helped shape Las Vegas. He is often called Mr. Las Vegas. Jamie Dimon's rise to the top was made possible by his connections and those of his benefactors to networks where intelligence, organized crime, and corporate power intermingle. Many of the same elite circles that gave rise to Jeffrey Epstein, namely those around Leslie Wexner, also played a key role in Jamie Dimon's selection to be the CEO of Bank One and later J.P. Morgan Chase. Jamie Dimon and Sandy Weil built Citigroup and in 1985 acquired Commercial Credit Association, which controlled Data Corporation, an espionage cutout tied to organized crime that made money by selling secrets using the PROMIS software to Russia and China. Assisted by Robert Maxwell and his lawyer confidant, Sam Pisar, stepdad of former Secretary of State Abe Lincoln. And that's how, not too long after that, about 10 years after that's when Maxwell was found dead near his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine. Yeah, selling secrets, but probably made billions. I mean, maybe hundreds of billions. I don't know, but this was a lot of treason. Yeah, that's treason. Henry Krinsky, born in Chicago, 1896, a Jewish immigrant from Lithuania, sweatshop foreman, went into the steel business with his brother Saul Irving, later changed their names to Crown, founding Material Service Corporation, MSC, a construction company that merged with General Dynamics in 1949. Henry had a relationship with Jake Avery, a notorious political fixer for the Democrats in Chicago. Avery had deep ties to the local mob, including the circles around Al Capone, and they all worked to get the mob-aligned politicians into positions of power, including the mayor's office, famous Mayor Daley, and Mayor Daley Jr. A super mob, also a book by Gus Russo, was created, mainly Jewish and Italian mobsters and businessmen who rose to power due to corruption in Chicago before expanding to other areas, especially the West Coast and I believe Las Vegas. Another Avery associate, Sidney Korshak, once called the successor to Meyer Lansky, was a fixer for organized crime and legitimate business interests. One of his clients, Crown's MSC, was able to obtain lucrative contracts in Chicago. Crown and Avery go way back. During World War II, Crown joined the Army and was able to help Avery get contracts to manage PX facilities via MSC. After the war, Crown became involved with David Baird, director of Hilton Hotels Incorporated. The Baird Foundation had close connection to Lansky's frontman, Louis Chesler, real estate magnates William Zeckendorf and Lawrence Wine, the Charles and Herbert Allen. Baird was also connected to Perm Index, the intelligence-linked outfit with both CIA and Mossad connections that's allegedly to have played a role in JFK's death. The Baird Foundation was later revealed to have been an asset of the CIA's International Organizations Division and acted as a pass-through conduit for sending agency funds to CIA fronts in the Middle East and Africa. Furthermore, Baird's banker, Serge Semenenko of First National Bank, Boston, had ties to Crown. Now, it's Semenenko. His name pops up again here later. Oh, here we go. Crown had once contacted Semenenko to arrange for financing of what would be the Acapulco Hilton. By the end of the 1950s, MSC merged with General Dynamics and was well on its way to becoming one of the top government contractors. How did they get there? Well, in 1962, Robert McNamara awarded a large contract to General Dynamics over the objections of his generals who wanted Boeing. The huge aircraft company sued in court, alleging that McNamara had a breakfast meeting with his deputy, Roswell Gilpatrick, who was a lawyer for General Dynamics from 1951 to 1968 to 1961, and was close to the Crown's and defense officials. RFK investigated and told Korth, Navy Secretary, the Navy Secretary, to resign because Korth was directly doing business with General Dynamics, which he did. He did resign on October 14th, 1963. RFK and JFK had earlier told Allen Dulles to resign over the Bay of Pigs fiasco, possibly putting targets on themselves. According to JFK's secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, JFK told her that LGBTQJ would not be his running mate on 11/1963. The next day, the president left for Texas. On the day he was shot, the Senate Rules Committee heard sworn testimony from Bobby Baker, LBJ's advisor associate, Don Reynolds, who was telling the committee of a big sex party in New York and about a suitcase with a $100,000 payoff to LBJ for his role in securing the Fort Worth TFX contract. The hearing was interrupted by news from Dallas. Later, General Dynamics proved to be incapable of fulfilling the specifications and admitted that the bribery scheme was a last-ditch effort to avoid bankruptcy. In October 1962, Lee Harvey Oswald and his wife had established social contact with Max Clark, Chief of Industrial Security for General Dynamics in Fort Worth. At the time, Oswald was working for the photographic firm Jaggers Chiles Stovall, which was doing classified work for the Army Security Agency. Oswald had a handler, George D. Mohrenschildt, who had been close with David Baird's main banker, Serge Semenenko, by the Sergei, right? Sergei, I don't know. And by association, Henry Crown. Henry had many connections to the Warren Commission, including a top counsel to the commission, Albert Jenner, who simultaneously represented Henry and an organized crime figure, Irvin Weiner, whom Ruby telephoned shortly before the assassination. There have been allegations that JFK and his mistress, Judith Exner, got caught up in the Wexner blackmailing scheme as the big defense contract was up for grabs. Exner said she was introduced to JFK by another John Connor associate singer Frank Sinatra at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami. The hotel was a well-known hangout for Sinatra, John Carno, and Chicago mobsters, and was owned by associates of Meyer Lansky. In 1962, the same year he learned of the Exner-JFK relationship, Henry Crown loaned the hotel $13 million. JFK and Exner got together in Suite 233 at the Plaza Hotel, the site of the organized crime-linked blackmail sex parties during the same period where guests were recorded without their knowledge. These parties reportedly involved Roy Cohn and J. Edgar Hoover, the notorious enemies of JFK and RFK. It raises the possibility that the room where Exner and the president stayed could also have been bugged by the same network. December 22nd, 1946, the Havana Conference. Lansky and Lucky Luciano brought all the major crime families together to crown Lucky as the boss of all bosses. However, he was currently in Cuba since his deportation, so Frank Costello was put in charge. This brought Gianovisi out of hiding, and a power struggle ensued. In 1957, he had Costello and others murdered. At the same conference, the international drug trade was set up with Lansky, Lucky, and Bugsy Siegel, moving the mafia into Las Vegas. When the Teamsters started building hotels in Cuba, Juan Batista, former chief of the armed forces, told Lansky, "Do here what you did in Vegas." This is the same international drug cartel that got started in China during Chiang Kai-shek's rise to power in the KMT. So there's a chapter 18 that starts with the KMT and finishes with the KMT through about 50 years of horrible corruption and murder and blackmail. So next is chapter 19, more ham-handed shenanigans. We're at just a minute to go, so I'm going to sign off right on time. Wild and crazy times here with the Trump transition and woke snowflakes going absolutely bananas. But the temptation is to gloat and make fun of them the way they made fun of everybody they hated. So the idea is to love and not hate. Try to reconcile if you become estranged from family or friends through the last 10 years of all this crapdiola. The Thanksgiving holidays provide an excellent opportunity to reconcile those differences and to reestablish that trust. And you can't do it by name calling or gloating or ridiculing, no matter how much fun it might be. Other people are doing enough of it. Check out some of these other podcasters. They are dumping on these folks like nobody's business. So I am going to come up next week with some ways of dealing with stuff that you're likely to hear during Thanksgiving. And hope you're doing well. Until then, stay cool, stay strong, have fun, and see you later. Bye now.